continued from part 1. So after we talk about Bond girls and how they're part of what makes a Bond movie into a Bond movie, we have to come back around to Ian Fleming.
Is it true?
Don't ask me about my
history.
Now, I mentioned before how he was smart but not the smartest, a raging underachiever if you will. But there is somewhere that he managed to do pretty well, and that was with the ladies. He basically slept his way across Europe in his teens and 20s. For all the stuff I just went over, Fleming was quite the ladies' man. At least, he's remembered as one in the writings of others. I don't necessarily doubt it, but there is something to creating a myth around the writer of one of the most notorious womanizers ever conceived. One of the critiques around his first major biography, published very quickly after his death, was that it attempted to cement the myth that Fleming was the model for Bond, when the likely truth is not so black and white. But I'll get back into that later. I read that for Fleming, the use of women in his novels, and I do mean use, and later on in the films, was a specific post-war fantasy. Well, this is probably true in some way. I would tweak that slightly and call it a specific power fantasy. Power that Bond holds over these women is fairly obvious, and power is something that Fleming also liked to wield over the women that he met. Despite the positives in his life, he was a cold man to many women. He never seemed to connect with people, and women were no exception. And he used them as he saw fit.
Sincerely, would you mind giving me something to put on?
Even if you were to look at the quote that was up earlier, a woman should be an illusion, it does show a weird attitude. What the hell are you talking about?
What?
I'm no psychologist, but there seemed to be a lot of mommy issues throughout his life, as she was a dominating presence. Like at one point, he was engaged to Monique Panchaud de Bottin, but when he brought her home, his mother quickly put a stop to that. After one meeting. With that kind of influence, it may not be hard for our armchair psychologist to diagnose him with some kind of issue or another.
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
It's not for nothing that his most lasting relationships with women seem to be with the older, often married variety. Through his dealings with women, Fleming's overall misogynistic attitude prevailed time and time again, at one time saying that he was going to focus on having sex without any scruples at all. He didn't care about having a conversation with an equal. He wanted what he wanted, and then he wanted to leave. As British novelist Rosamund Lehman once said, the trouble with Ian is that he gets off with women because he cannot get on with them. In other words, sex seemed to be masking something else that was missing at his core. And although Fleming might have preferred the company of more mature women, they rarely had a place in his books. It has been noted that in the novels, women were only there to be saved and seduced, or to be angry lesbians who wanted to kill all men. Not 100% accurate, but kinda close. The same could be seen in the earlier films as well.
What was that for?
For saving my life.
Remind me to do it more often.
But began to change maybe when Timothy Dalton was Bond, and the women started fighting back a bit more.
Let's get it started.
Or at least a little. No longer content to leave the men's work to the men. Sure, it may have happened sometimes before then, but those instances were few and far between. Fleming's personal feelings on women in the workplace were not hard to figure out.
And remember, nothing says good job like a firm, open palm slap on the behind.
And on that note, we come to a major controversy with Fleming's work, and it has to do with the awful topic of rape. I know, this kind of lighthearted video doesn't really seem like the place for it, but it's there as a topic and I'm not going to avoid it. Now, I don't mean that Fleming himself was a rapist, but when sex is a sport to you, and women are used like so many footballs or hockey sticks, then you're bound to have some terrible opinions on the matter. It wasn't prevalent, it wasn't all-encompassing, but it was there. In the very first novel, Casino Royale, Bond notes that, and now he knew that, the conquest of her body, because of the central piracy in her, would have the sweet tang of rape, concerning perhaps the most famous Bond girl, the one who took his heart, Vesper Lynd. And if it wasn't clear already, when he wrote The Spy Who Loved Me in 1962, nearly a decade later, he used another character as narrator alongside Bond, Vivian Michel, and the infamous line in question comes from that female voice, as written by Fleming. All women love semi-rape. They love to be taken. It was his sweet brutality against my bruised body that made his act of love so piercingly wonderful. Hard to digest. Even harder to defend, and you won't see me try to. Fleming came out after the publication saying that he wrote that book to show young men that Bond was no one to be emulated, that he was not the hero everyone seemed to think he was.
I didn't intend for Bond to be likable. He's a blunt instrument in the hands of the government. He's got vices and few perceptible virtues.
Call me cynical, but that screams of backtracking. Especially considering that the poor reception of this book had him reverting to the classic writing formula for the next one. Not surprisingly, when they took that title for the 1977 film, they left that part out of it. Actually, they left everything out of it, taking only the name, which would become an ongoing trend for the movies. Even in this movie, there's an unfortunate scene. So, it's very obvious that the secretary, Ms. Taro, is in on the bad guy's plot, so Bond goes to meet her to prove that the rock lover was in on it too. It's on his way there that the car crash takes place. License to kill, not to drive.
I think they were on their way to a funeral.
And after witnessing death, Bond is ready to take advantage of someone. And here is little Miss Taro, an actress covered in makeup to simulate an Asian background.
I'll make you a Chinese dinner here.
Ripe for the picking. Jesus, that didn't sound as bad when I was writing it out. But there it is. And here we see Bond take advantage of the fact that she needs to keep him at her place, to have him killed. I guess we aren't supposed to feel bad because she's a bad guy herself, but the lines of bad guys are kind of blurred in this scene. Oh god, no. So they sleep together, but I don't find myself cheering. And after he has her taken away, she reacts in what doesn't seem like an overreaction. I did say that this movie was one of the closer ones to the books, right? So after all of that, it may be surprising to hear that lifelong bachelor Ian Fleming eventually did get hitched. In 1952, he married Anne Rothermere, whom he had been carrying on an affair with all throughout her second marriage. In 1948, she even gave birth to Fleming's daughter Mary, but the child was unfortunately stillborn. It was her indelicate dealings with Fleming that led to her divorce in 1951. She and Fleming got married only several months before she gave birth to a healthy baby boy, Casper. But, pretty obviously, a marriage isn't the same as an affair.
Storms are brewing.
And they still got married, despite knowing that they probably were really unsuited for each other. If you go from seeing someone for a few weeks at a time to all the time, you might find out that they aren't who you thought they were. As you might expect, it was not a match made in heaven. They fought often, they both took other lovers, and made no real effort to hide it. And every year, Fleming left for a couple months to be in Jamaica. Despite all that though, there really did seem to be some love there, as seen in their letters, though it's easier to show affection when you're halfway across the world from each other. In a way, it was actually Anne that convinced him to start writing his first novel. Even though her snobby literary friends always seemed to look down on him. He would work at a torrid pace as if to prove them wrong, more than a book a year. And if he never gained their respect for the type of books he wrote, then he likely made up for it in the cultural legacy department. See, even though it might seem out of place, looking at these moments, difficult as they may be, are worth considering more than what boarding school he went to. In the year following their marriage, he got the first Bond book published. And he was lucky too, because the original publisher only did it as a favor to Fleming's older brother Peter, who was already a published author himself. As ever, it seemed there weren't too many high hopes for Fleming, especially in the sales concerning this book, and writing about a spy in the post-war years. His own wife didn't even want him to dedicate the first book to her. But if people thought that these books were going to fail, they were all wrong.
Did I do wrong?
Well, it wouldn't do to make
Book.
a bit of it.
Listen, I want to get this out of the way before we go on. Even though there is some seriously weird and terrible stuff being said here, I don't think anyone should stop watching the movies if you like them. Hell, I like them.
Apparently we're very much in love.
I'm not trying to ruin or cancel James Bond. At the same time, can't and shouldn't avoid some of these issues.
What's going on behind my back?
Nothing. Look. No hands.
Okay, so the film is progressing now, right? Plot recap, despite me saying to watch it yourself. Dr. No, bad. Bond kills Rock Guy, and now knows he needs to search this island to stop the missile plan thing. Okay, we're all caught up. Great. Now, though, we get to what might be the most important aspects of James Bond's character: bad decisions and blind luck. It might not seem like these two elements go together, but I assure you they do. Let's look into it. One of the best examples is earlier in the movie, when Bond is fixing himself a drink after a hard day of work. He knows someone was in his room, thanks to his amazing gadgets, but is suddenly worried about being poisoned. Good thinking, Bond. They probably want to kill you. Make sure you don't... Oh, he just took another bottle out of the unlocked drawer and is using that one instead. Our hero, always one step ahead. He's very lucky to have survived that. If you go through the Bond movies, you'll see that this will become a trend. After ogling Honey for the respectable amount of time as befitting an English gentleman, they start talking and Bond gets her to follow him, putting her in a lot of danger on the vague hope, or maybe not so vague for him, that they'll sleep together.
I can assure you my intentions are strictly honorable.
He then orders Quarrel to get his shoes, in a pathetic and obvious effort at asserting dominance.
Fetch my shoes.
Goddamn cracker.
We see through you, Bond. This definitely has a harder time playing to a modern audience, but racial issues in early Bond can wait until another time. I said another time.
Hold on to these, will you? Keep you in curry for a few weeks, won't it? Thank you.
I said another time. It's also around this point that the dubbing issue starts showing more blatantly. I understand that movies often need to be redubbed to get better volume for the final product. I also understand that actors with accents often need someone else to dub for them for an English audience to understand them.
I think she had rather an attractive voice, but it was a voice with a heavy accent.
Peter Hunt hires voice artist Monica Vandersil to redub Ursula Andress.
Of course, that's not always the case.
Impossible.
But once you rewatch the scenes with Honey with the knowledge that she's being dubbed over, it starts becoming very apparent. And I guess, since I'm ragging on the editor, a professional in his field who isn't a lazy armchair critic slob like myself, I might as well go into another issue. The snap cuts.
The standard thing was, you mustn't cut on movement because it'll be a jump, you know.
The editor purposely made these snap cuts that you'll notice throughout the film. He did it to try to create a different style, but it's definitely jarring to watch. At the same time, the opposite is true. He left in a lot of long cuts that I also complained about, so maybe I'm just never happy. We might as well look at Bond's harrowing escape. Hold on though, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself again. First we need to look into how he got captured in the first place. Our intrepid heroes were found immediately and chased through the woods. Why the guys with the guns on the boat didn't just go onto the beach and get them right away, I'll never know. And if you tell me it's because they weren't sure that they were there, then how did they catch up to them so quickly? So Bond and co. try and lose them in the river. So they hide from the dogs in some of the clearest water I've ever seen, and somehow don't get seen. Maybe it's the blind leading the blind. Oh, that reminds me, this is another instance of blind luck saving the day. Then Bond pointlessly murders a lagging guard. Probably to remind the audience that he's still a hard case.
Why?
Because I had to. Because I had to. Because I had to.
That actually would have tipped the other guards off to come back, since Carl, or whatever his name is now missing.
Carl! Carl! Carl!
So cue another bad decision.
Because I had to.
But I guess it doesn't really matter because they still get away somehow, relying on Bond's luck to save them, which is apparently all you need here, and plan on hiding out until they can escape. What's that? It's been 5 minutes of screen time? Well then it's time for another... Bond runs towards the first sound that he hears. Finally, we get to see the fabled dragon everyone's always been talking about.
That was a machine gun, not a dragon.
Oh, there's a dragon here, too.
Look at me!
Those are dragon tracks.
Hey, Quarrel, if you see a dragon... Listen, both of you. There are no such things as dragon.
You see, there's a dragon.
What?
Bond still doesn't believe in it, and I think he only goes in an effort to prove how much smarter he is than everyone else, even though the smart decision would have been to wait until darkness and leave the island. So we see the dragon. Turns out it's a minivan with some cardboard siding and a flamethrower attachment. It looks like it belongs in a soapbox derby. Wow, Bond was right in looking down on them. That looks awful. How could you actually think that's a real dragon? I thought he was just being insensitive, but it actually doesn't look anything like a dragon.
What?
How civilized he is compared to the rest of them. But Bond devises a plan, probably titled Project Bad Decision, and immediately attacks it.
When it gets within range, you take the driver. I'll take the headlights and the tires. You keep safe out of sight.
And gets Quarrel killed. Ah, Quarrel, we hardly knew thee.
Miss my shoes.
I could make some analogy about a minority character dying in the pointless plans of a British man, but yeah. So, anyway, Project Bad Decision, rousing success. But instead of getting killed, they get captured by two guys that seem like it's their first day on the job.
Hey you! Hey you! Where do you think you're going?
Lucky, huh? It also seems like they were supposed to be captured and not killed, so all the running had absolutely no purpose in the end.
Yeah, that's fine, but do something about this, will you? Here, come here, you. Here.
Now we finally get to see the villain of the movie. All this hype is built around him. His name is in the title, so he better not be... Yep, another actor with makeup to look Asian. At least it's supposed to be German Asian this time, but the Canadian actor playing the part makes it a bit
It was a different time back then. There was a war on.
At the same time, Dr. No does show off an element of Bond villains that would continue. Rich, eccentric in style, and sporting some kind of physical deformity to match their evil, twisted minds.
Forgive my not shaking hands, it becomes a bit awkward with these, a misfortune.
Just look at those hands!
Tell me, does the toppling of American missiles really compensate for having no hands?
Got him!
Esquire, known for their hard-hitting journalism, ranked this guy at number 10 all time in the top Bond villains? What were they thinking? I will say one thing about this guy, whose plan is to steal US rockets with radio waves.
Or something.
The stakes have never been more boring. But there's also the Bond mainstay that also seems like a parody of itself in this movie. The villain revealing their entire plan for no reason.
When trouble comes, you'll find this is a very small and naked little island.
An expendable little island, Mr. Bond. When my mission here in Crab Key is accomplished, I destroy it and move on. But the habit of inquiry is persistent. I see you're wondering why, where, when.
It's like a meme at this point. And he talks about respecting Bond?
I only gratify your curiosity because you're the one man I've met capable of appreciating what I've done.
Based off of him bumbling around for more than an hour of screen time before being caught incredibly easily.
I was curious to see what kind of a man you were. I thought there might even be a place for you with Spectre.
This is the kind of guy you respect? This is the kind of guy you want to join your secret global criminal network, the existence of which you just freely gave away?
I'm a member of Spectre.
Spectre?
Spectre. Special Exec...
Spectre?
Spectre. Special Executive for Counterintelligence...
Spectre?
Spectre.
Spectre?
Spectre. Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, Extortion. The four great cornerstones of power...
Spectre?
You persist in trying to with me, Mr. Bond. I could have had you in the swamp.
And why didn't you?
I thought you less stupid. Usually when a man gets in my
Alright, power to you, I guess. However, he sees through Bond almost immediately after meeting him face to face.
Unfortunately, I misjudged you. You are just a stupid policeman.
Throughout the movies, not enough of the villains have such open disdain for Bond's intelligence, so this is a nice moment, although not to be repeated too often. An interesting note is there isn't a blind Red Menace vibe here, and Dr. No is also very aware that the hatred of the major world powers to one another allows for men like him to thrive.
With your disregard for human life, you must be working for the East.
East, West, just points of the compass, each as stupid as the other. I'm a member of Spectre.
Spectre?
Spectre.
Spectre?
Spectre.
Spectre?
So we get back to where we were. Bond is put in a cell instead of killed. Okay. But he escapes through the use of his most important gadget, his loafer. After dropping through tubes, he is replaced suddenly by a stunt double. Yeah, usually the worst you see in a movie is the back of someone's head who's obviously wearing a wig, but this is something completely different. Man, I'm really harping on this editor from a movie from 1962. Worth it. Just to note, the book had this tube section also, but it was part of an elaborate torture obstacle course set up for Bond by Dr. No. Instead, in the movie, he goes through some tubes because he was put in a cell with a giant screen door by a so-called doctor. Doctor of what again? In terms of Bond tropes, this is the first instance of showing off how the villain's arrogance leads to their downfall. In this case, by keeping Bond alive for no reason.
What are you feeding him? Why don't you just kill him?
No, Scott, I have an even better idea. I'm going to place him in an easily escapable situation involving an overly elaborate and exotic death.
And it definitely wouldn't be the last. But I digress. Bond is free and it's time for the final showdown. Physically fighting the bad guy is important, since it shows how Bond dominates his adversaries. A lot of Bond movies end this way, and it helps confirm what we know about his character, how he is better than the other guy because he can punch him in the face. Before we get to that, there's more boring talking and walking.
Control. Control rod actuators operating. Core temperature 113. Converters. Convector standing by. Ignition heaters on. Radiation. Counters 121, 141, 109. Energy stabilizers. Energy steady at 0.8 megawatts.
And when Bond overloads the reactor somehow, he just barely beats this crippled man. Leaving him to drown in boiling, irradiated water when he can't get himself out.
Damn your opposable thumbs.
So all that's left is to save the girl. I assume he's saving her because he hasn't slept with her yet. In another version of the script, she was actually being attacked by giant crabs, which I think is a metaphor we would have all liked to see on screen. So Bond and Honey escape. But, since Bond needs to end the movie with the girl, he lets go of the rope that was towing them to safety, ensuring they die adrift in the ocean, but making sure that Honey will be attacked by a different sort of crabs this time.
What's going on behind my back?
Nothing. Look. No hands.
Also, how long does radiation poisoning take to show? Oh good, everything worked out because of blind dumb luck.
I hope you'll forgive me, but it's most important. Thank you. Now, Mr. Jones, talk fast before your friend doubles back. Hold it. Gently, bud, gently. Let's not get excited. Professor, and behind.
Hey, all right.
Get the others done fast. We gotta get out of here quick. Where is this hiding place?
Up there.
And just a note, it may seem like I sped towards the end here, but Bond meets the villain face to face and kills him in the last 20 minutes of the movie. At the same time, maybe there is something to the mystery element, as opposed to... Who can say? People weren't sure if it was going to be a hit, but no one saw how successful it would become, or where it would lead to. As the war ended, so did Fleming's purpose. He kind of began to drift again. Sure, he eventually found a steady job through his own merit, and by that I mean his many contacts, one that allowed him plenty of leisure time. But the world wasn't exactly back to normal in 1945. Britain kept rationing food and other things we take for granted for years after the war, making the country seem even more downbeat than usual. It wasn't the same for Fleming, of course. Well, he constantly chased money and fame, and especially money.
Money, please.
He was far from poor.
Money, please.
In a post-war Britain still trying to recover, he was very well off. He even built a holiday home for himself in Jamaica, which he named GoldenEye. Sound familiar? He apparently got the name from a military operation during the war. But also could have taken it from the title of a book. It's unclear, before it was obviously used in a later Bond film. He had fallen in love with the island nation after going there during a conference during the war. He spent a lot of time there without his wife, but not alone, if you get my meaning. So it seems as though there was a chance that this black sheep would fall back into his old habits. The war had ended, and with it, the structure that it had given his life. But they say the best moments of inspiration come from the most trying times. So when Fleming claimed that he wrote Casino Royale to avoid thinking about his upcoming marriage, we can all relate. But begin to write he did. And so with this we come back to the question, who was the inspiration for James Bond? If some would have you believe it, it was Fleming himself who was the inspiration for the character, even though he denied it. Well, there's some truth in that. I think that some of what I shared so far kind of makes it hard to think of this guy as a hero. And movie Bond is a hero.
That bomb is set to explode at 3:45. That's 90 seconds from now.
General, this man's either drunk or crazy.
Sure, they both drank too much, were womanizers and loners, and at some point worked for the British government. But there was more to both of them than that. Although there was a certain sadness and loneliness to Bond that mirror his creator, Bond remains a man of action.
5 minutes later.
A warrior who could never live behind a desk, and whose country would never survive if he did. No, let me amend that. The whole world wouldn't survive. There's certainly very little trace of uncertainty or regret in that character.
There's no hurry, you see. We have all the time in the world.
Bond was also an orphan who was a proficient gambler and never seemed to worry about money or care about fame. Doesn't sound like Fleming, does it? So when we look at options, it could have been Fleming's older brother or his father. Both war heroes in their own right. Others think it was based on one or more of the various secret agent or commando types that Fleming met or worked with over the course of the war, especially since Fleming has said the same thing. See, there were a lot of them, but these are just some of the names people connect with the Bond myth. These were men of action who put their lives on the line to serve their country, just like James Bond. But there is no one man who could do what Bond does. Fleming took the best, or in some cases the worst, aspects of a lot of different people to make an escapist fantasy for himself and others. Bond isn't Fleming. Bond is who Fleming wanted to be. A mix of characteristics that he found to be desirable. Hell, he's who a lot of people probably wanted to be. But I still think there is some Fleming in there, and people close to him would have you believe the same thing. Bond and Fleming shared a lot of the same tastes, even the same golf handicap, and that falls in line with Fleming taking his reality and twisting it into his narratives. Fleming wrote a lot of the characters based on people he knew and names he remembered. One of his favorite ways of naming characters was thinking of two classmates and switching their first and last names. He took names from those he met and mixed traits that he noticed into his characters. Hell, even the name James Bond is taken from the author of a book on ornithology that Fleming had lying around. He said that it was perfect since it was the simplest, dullest, plainest sounding name that he could find.
I wanted a really flat, quiet name. And one of my Bibles out here is James Bond's Birds of the West Indies, which is a very famous ornithological book indeed. And I thought, well, now, James Bond, now that's a pretty quiet name. And so I simply stole it and used it.
Can't believe there's actually a clip of him saying it.
There's a strange clinic run by Dr. Alvarez. He leads the field in gene therapy, increasing the life expectancy of our beloved leaders, and of course, the richest Westerners.
But again, we see that Fleming's ideas grew out of things he had seen or people he had met. He took ideas and changed them, slightly or otherwise, to fit into his stories. We even saw that during the war, with his most notable success, 30 Assault Unit, coming from a similar German unit. If you passed him in the street, you might have made it into one of his books.
Hey baby, want to be famous?
I'll save the history of the effort to make the Bond movies happen for another time, if ever. But if I can simplify it to the extreme, just like Fleming's efforts to write the books, it was mainly about money. Fleming wasn't overly involved in the process anyway, as we've seen, at least besides cashing the check. And as time wore on, he did refuse to change his habits, drinking and smoking enough to make even the swarthiest sailor go, "Whoa, maybe take a break there, fella." His time was split between typing away his Bond books on a golden typewriter in Jamaica and work back home. He never seemed much for settling down to family life, despite his marriage. And the books were very popular, obviously. Despite doubts, Casino Royale needed several printing runs, and money did follow. All from writing 2,000 words a day for less than 2 months a year, with little editing along the way. My own process is very different.
Remember, Sally, when I promised
that I would edit my work in a timely manner?
That's what made you did! I lied.
But to each their own. And his was a success. The glitz and glamour myth of the spy life was born, and readers could live vicariously through Bond. There was quite a particular emphasis on fine dining in the books, which spat in the face of the rationing status quo. The reviews were actually pretty good for the first few books, but after the fifth it started to turn. They argued against the sex and the violence, really all the stuff that we love about the movies. There was also a big court case surrounding Thunderball, if you could believe it. I mentioned earlier that it was supposed to be the first film, and this case was really a result of that effort. I like to imagine an uptight British judge having to say Thunderball in court, and it makes me smile.
Thunderball, Thunderball, Thunderball.
But that's a story for another time. Still though, the demand for the books was there, and the movies would only increase that demand. It's one of the great tragedies of his life that Fleming was always chasing money. When he started making it, he was already on the downward turn. So Fleming's life was interesting enough, sure, but not one to be emulated. Bond's drinking and smoking habits are very much taken from the author, and were likely lessened so as to seem more real. And those definitely didn't help keep him alive. Upwards of 80 cigarettes a day is pretty extreme. He was advised to slow down, but said at one time that he would not waste his days in trying to prolong them. Unsurprisingly, he was plagued with heart problems in the last years of his life. As his heart problems heightened, so did his hectic life, and that led to his end. He died in August 1964 from a heart attack, just a month before Goldfinger premiered in theaters, only 2 weeks after his mother had passed, and literally on his son's 12th birthday. Side note, Fleming's life ended earlier than it should have, just as his sons did, who committed suicide at 23 from a planned drug overdose, outliving his mother. Man, I really know how to bring down the tone of this work. Book and film sales continued to rise after his death, as the story of James Bond grew into legend. Would Ian Fleming have considered a black James Bond? Or a female Jane Bond? Probably not. Actually, I'd say definitely not, considering his views.
Because I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur. A relic of the Cold War.
He liked the simplicity of good versus evil, with a certain type of hero. There were betrayals in his books.
The bitch is dead.
But very little nuance in terms of what was right, or what he deemed right. Despite the fact that the world was changing, he wasn't. For example, he never approved of gay people, despite having gay friends like Noel Coward, a man who he even wanted to play Dr. No before he refused. Bond was written in a very specific way as a response to what Fleming perceived as threats to both manhood and Britain. Was he all bad? No, of course not. He served his country in World War II, seemed like a proud, if not distant, father, and wrote one of the most well-known characters of all time. More than anything, he was a product of his time, just as his books were. That's what history really is. Looking at things that took place at a certain time and understanding them and what they meant in the context of that time. Also, pretty obviously, understanding these things in history is not the same thing as condoning them. It's so obvious, in fact, I feel like it should go without saying, but of course, nothing does anymore. I wasn't exaggerating about the pace of his writing either. Since he started his first draft in 1952 until his death in 1964, he wrote 12 Bond novels and 2 sets of Bond-centric short stories, some of which were only published after his death, as well as 2 non-fiction books, and, in what is often a surprise to people, the children's book Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which was based on a story he told his son before bed. That single book was probably his most successful overall. But just like with his Bond novels, the movie version is different from the source material. So obviously he could engage a reader, but it didn't seem like his words necessarily translated to a visual medium.
9, 7, 6, 5.
Bang on time.
4.
Bang, 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 bang.
What have you done, Miss Friend?
Bang, 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 bang.
I'll find for friend and friend.
Bang, 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 bang.
I'll find for friend and friend.
5.
Bang on time.
There's a reason they only kept his titles for most of the movies. We've seen Bond films come and go, and he has ranged from detective to superhero to clown to revenge-fueled maniac. At this point, it seems we've moved away from the sillier Bond.
You're not thinking that. I sure am, boy.
Never heard of Evel Knievel?
To a more serious one that fits into our world today, or at least how we perceive it. There's a reason that the tone has shifted. The world is different now than it was. I also think that we, as a population, are more jaded. At least, I am. As a result, we need our bond to be grittier, tougher overall. And I don't mean in terms of wanton murder or promiscuity. Those staples are safe. But in the way our values are expressed through cinema. Modern audiences probably wouldn't accept a bond that acts like this.
Hey, let me! Ow! Ow! Hey, what are you doing? Ouch! Come on! I can't breathe! Ow! You'll be sorry!
Instead, we want this. We're okay with a Bond seducing women like this.
I can't find the stationery. You come and help me look.
But not so much like this.
Don't go to any trouble on my account.
Please.
Well, forgive me. I thought I was invited up here to admire the view. But I feel one of us should answer it.
That's a bit much. So, even though I said that Bond as a character doesn't change very much, we can see that there are some definite changes in how he is presented to us as time goes on. So what started as an effort to unpack the very first Bond film?
Oh, you're a legend, old boy. Card Sense Jimmy Bond, they call you.
The very first Bond film that matters, has come to this moment, when I can finally go into a diatribe whining about the state of history today. History isn't only about boring old facts and publishing books that no one will ever read. I mean, that's a lot of it. Actually, maybe most of it. But there can be more. And you can say that I sound bitter.
You know, I think I'll call that a
history degree.
Because of the bitter aftertaste.
Yes.
And you're right, I do. But it doesn't mean that it's not true. Honestly, would I care about the exclusivity and gatekeeping within the history community and the desire to publish over the desire to educate if I was part of that club?
The thought had occurred to me.
Probably not. I can't speak to what may have been. Just like I'm not trying to speak to what might have been with the Bond movies. I like them for what they are on the surface. Fun, campy action movies. But if we dig a little deeper, like I said, maybe there's more to see, especially if we want to find it. History is the same kind of way. Sure, there are base level facts you can use at trivia night or the latest meme template, but if something really piques your interest, don't let anyone tell you that there's nothing there. Look at the sources and find out for yourself. Knowledge can affect how we see the world, but it doesn't have to be life-changing to be worthwhile. Knowledge of the past can impact how we act now, especially in terms of how we no longer do or say certain things. But caring about history doesn't have to be groundbreaking. It can just be interesting.
Too bad you have to go. Just as things were getting interesting.
Alright, let me get off my soapbox for a second. At some point we were talking about a Bond movie, and the character's creator. Dr. No was a product of its time, the first of a series that would span generations, and already one of the last ones that would closely follow the books. Its author, also a product of his time, wouldn't last so long. Like most people, Ian Fleming was a complicated person. He could charm a room, but was prone to bouts of loneliness. He liked to complicate his plots, but the backdrop was always simple. Good versus evil. Even if it was his definitions of what was good and what was evil. He had some pretty bad ideas about women. No buts about it. He was flawed, like most people are. Trying to make it big, always aware of the crushing opinions of others, acting to soothe his ego, and chasing more than what he had. Listen though, I'm not trying to romanticize him. In the end, he was just a person. So maybe let's hold off on moralizing over him. At least a little. On the other hand, Dr. No was also more of a detective story, where Bond didn't just shoot every problem.
For your eyes only, darling.
It had its ups.
Bond. James Bond.
And downs. And downs.
Put some clothes on.
Don't go to any trouble on my account.
And downs.
Fetch my shoes.
Oh God. Sure, there were the little mistakes that happen in every movie. I'm not holding those against it. It was Bond's first go and it was what it was. And I haven't even discussed everything that I wanted to include either. I had to trim a lot from this script. There are neat little things like the inclusion of the Goya painting, which was something of a pop culture phenomenon at the time, or Sean Connery's severe arachnophobia during this scene. Hell, just talking about the music in this movie alone could be its own video. But based on this film, and after what would come next, it almost feels kind of quaint. Like a starting point to mark better times to come.
I see you handle your weapon well.
I have been known to keep my tip up.
Well, maybe not better. But the movies would certainly shift over time in tone and content. So let me say this for all to hear. There's nothing wrong with liking these movies.
I like James Bond.
Okay then, that was always allowed.
I like them. I like Dr. No too, despite what the last hour plus of running time might have you believe. They are fun to watch, and isn't that the most important thing? Escapist, sure, but most movies are in the end. And like I said, there's more to come. More shooting, more ladies, more explosions, and luckily, more weird and crazy moments. And for me, a subject that's less about a single person, because I want to look at more history. For all its problems, this movie is the one that started it all, for better or for worse. And thank God we can end on a positive note, right?
With your sort of face, it's wonderful.
What's going on behind my back?
Nothing. Look. No hands.
Okay, well, there you go.
What have you done, Miss Friend?
Bang, 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 bang.
I'll find for friend and friend.
Bang, 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 bang.
I'll find for friend and friend.
Bang on time. Or something.
What have you done, Miss Friend?
Bang, 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 bang.
I'll find for friend and friend.
Bang, 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 bang.
I'll find for friend and friend.
Bang on time.
Hey, this took me a really long time to make, and unfortunately during that period, Sir Sean Connery passed away. I know I might have poked fun at him here and there throughout this thing, but honestly, when it comes down to it, a true legend. And really probably my favorite Bond.
Bond. James Bond.
He's definitely up there.